You think you know family favoritism until your parents spend 30 years telling you you're the family disappointment, while your older brother could do no wrong. Then expect you to empty your life savings to bail him out when he's arrested for running a drug operation. This is the story of how I watched the golden child fall from grace and refused to catch him. And it's the most satisfying thing I've ever done in my life. Hi, everyone. I'm Marcus, and I need to tell you about the most vindicated I've ever felt in my entire life. But to understand why this story is so satisfying, you need to understand the family dynamic I grew up in. I'm 32 years old, and I have one older brother, Derek, who's 35. From the day I was born, it was clear who was a favorite child in our family, and it wasn't me. Derek was everything my parents wanted in a son. He was tall, athletic, charismatic, and seemingly successful. He was a star quarterback in high school, dated the prettiest girls, and had everyone convinced he was destined for greatness. I was different. I was shorter, more introverted, and preferred reading to sports. I got good grades, but that was expected rather than celebrated. I had a few close friends rather than being popular, and I was more interested in science and computers than the social activities Derek excelled at. From as early as I can remember, my parents made it clear that Derek was a golden child, and I was a problem they had to manage. When Derek got in trouble at school for fighting, my parents said he was standing up for himself and showing leadership. When I got in trouble once for forgetting a homework assignment, I was irresponsible and not living up to my potential. When Derek barely graduated high school with a 2.1 GPA, my parents threw him a huge graduation party and bragged about his well-rounded high school experience. When I graduated as valedictorian with a 4.0 GPA and a full scholarship to college, they said it was expected because I was naturally academic. The double standard was so obvious that teachers, neighbors, and even family friends noticed it. But my parents were completely blind to their own favoritism. This pattern continued throughout our entire lives, and it shaped everything about our family relationships. After high school, our paths diverged significantly, but somehow Derek's failures were always more celebrated than my successes. I went to college on a full academic scholarship, studied computer science, graduated magna cum laude, and landed a job at a tech company right out of college. Within 5 years, I was promoted to a senior developer position, bought my own house, and was making six figures. Derek had a different trajectory. He bounced around community colleges for a few years, never completing a degree. He worked a series of jobs, construction, restaurant management, sales, but never stayed anywhere long. He moved back in with our parents 3 different times, always with dramatic stories about how his bosses didn't appreciate his talents or how he was too good for whatever job he quit or been fired from. But here's the crazy part. My parents still treated Derek like he was a successful one. When I bought my house at 26, my parents' reaction was, well, Marcus has always been good with money. He's so practical and boring. When Derek moved back in with them for the 3rd time at 28, their reaction was, Derek is just going through a rough patch. He's so creative and ambitious. The regular working world just doesn't appreciate visionaries like him. When I got promoted to team lead and started managing other developers, my parents said, that's nice, Marcus. Derek is thinking about starting his own business soon. When Derek's business ideas inevitably failed before they even started, it was because the market wasn't ready for his innovations. I could cure cancer, and my parents would find a way to make it about how Derek was more well-rounded because he also played guitar. By the time I was 30, I had established myself professionally and financially. I owned my house outright, had substantial savings, a solid investment portfolio, and no debt besides a small, manageable mortgage on a rental property I'd bought. Derek, meanwhile, was 33 and still living with our parents, working sporadically, and always having some kind of financial crisis. That's when the loan requests started. First, it was small amounts. Marcus, Derek needs $500 to fix his car so he can get to job interviews. Marcus, Derek needs $1,200 to pay first month's rent on an apartment. Marcus, Derek needs $800 to buy professional clothes for his new sales job. Every request came through my parents, never directly from Derek. And every request was framed as me helping my struggling brother get back on his feet. I said yes to the first few requests because I genuinely wanted to help Derek succeed. But I quickly noticed a pattern. Derek never paid back any of the loans, and within weeks of each emergency, he would need money for something else. After about a year of this, I had loaned Derek nearly $8,000 with zero repayment and zero evidence that any of the money had actually gone to the things my parents said it was for. So I started saying no. Mom, I've already given Derek almost $8,000 this year. I need to see some repayment before I can help him again. Marcus, how can you be so cold about money when your brother is struggling? We raise you better than that. Family helps family. I am helping family. I've been helping Derek for over a year, but I'm not an ATM. Derek is going through a hard time right now. You've been so blessed with success. Can't you share some of that blessing with your brother? Notice how my success was now a blessing that I should share rather than the result of hard work and good decisions. But the guilt trips didn't stop there. My father started calling me selfish and materialistic. My mother would cry and say she was disappointed in how I was treating Derek. Derek himself never called me directly, never thanked me for the money I had given him, and never acknowledged that he owed me anything. According to him, I was his brother, so helping him financially was just my obligation. When I was 31, Derek came up with his biggest money request yet. He wanted me to invest $25,000 in his new business idea. Derek claimed he had developed a revolutionary new energy drink formula and just needed startup capital to get it off the ground. He had prepared a whole presentation about market opportunity, projected profits, and how I could be a founding investor in his future empire. Marcus, this is Derek's big break. My mother explained over dinner. He's finally found his calling, and he just needs some initial investment to make it happen. What exactly is a business plan? I asked. Derek launched into this elaborate explanation about proprietary formulas, targeted marketing, and projected sales numbers. It all sounded very impressive and businesslike, but I'm not an idiot. I asked some basic questions. Have you trademarked the formula? Do you have a business license? Have you done any market testing? Do you have manufacturing partnerships lined up? What about FDA approval for food products? Derek's answers were vague and evasive. He didn't have any of the basic legal or business infrastructure in place. He hadn't done any real market research. He didn't have a realistic business plan. What he had was a vague idea about making an energy drink and a belief that I should give him $25,000 to fund his fantasy. Derek, I'm not comfortable investing that amount of money in a business that doesn't have basic legal protections and planning in place. So you're saying you don't believe in me? Derek responded, I'm saying I don't invest in businesses without proper documentation and realistic business plans. That's when the family pressure campaign began. My parents started calling me daily, telling me I was crushing Derek's dreams and holding back his potential. They said I was jealous of Derek's creativity and threatened by the possibility that he might become more successful than me. Marcus, your brother has never asked you for anything this big before, my mother said. This could be his chance to finally make something of himself, and you're standing in his way. Mom, he's asked me for almost $10,000 over the past 2 years and hasn't paid back a penny. Now he wants $25,000 for a business that exists only in his imagination. Why are you so concerned about money? You have more than enough. It's not about the money. It's about the fact that Derek has no plan, no experience, and no track record of following through on anything. You're being so negative and unsupportive. This isn't how we raised you to treat family. The guilt trips were relentless. I was selfish, materialistic, jealous, unsupportive, and basically a terrible brother and son. But I held firm and refused to invest in Derek's non-existent business. Derek's energy drink empire never materialized, of course. Within a month, he had moved on to a new get-rich-quick scheme that also required family funding. Over the next year, Derek's requests for money became more frequent and more desperate. He always had some crisis or emergency that required immediate financial assistance. His car broke down and needed expensive repairs. His rent was behind and he was facing eviction. He had a job opportunity that required professional training he couldn't afford. He had health problems that required medical treatment he couldn't pay for. Every story was different, but the pattern was always the same. Derek needed money urgently. I was the only family member who could help him, and I was a terrible person if I said no. But I started paying attention to Derek's lifestyle and noticed some inconsistencies. Derek claimed he was broke and struggling to pay rent, but he always had money for expensive dinners, concert tickets, and weekend trips. He drove a car that needed constant expensive repairs, but was a luxury vehicle that was only a few years old. Derek said he couldn't find steady work, but he turned down job offers that he considered beneath him. He wouldn't work retail, food service, or manual labor because those jobs were temporary, and he was meant for bigger things. I realized that Derek wasn't actually struggling financially because he was unable to make money. He was struggling because he refused to live within his means or take responsibility for his choices. And my parents were enabling his irresponsible behavior by constantly pressuring me to subsidize his lifestyle. When I was 31, I started dating Sarah, a social worker who specialized in family dynamics and addiction counseling. Sarah was the first person outside my family who really understood what I was dealing with. After meeting my family a few times, Sarah pulled me aside. "Marcus, I need to talk to you about your family dynamics." "What do you mean?" "Your parents have created a really unhealthy dynamic where Derek is enabled to be irresponsible because they expect you to be the responsible one who fixes his problems. I've been starting to see that pattern myself. It's called the golden child and scapegoat dynamic. Derek gets all the praise and attention, but no accountability. You get all the responsibility and criticism, but no recognition. And your parents maintain this dynamic because it serves their need to see Derek as successful and you as a support system." Sarah helped me understand that my parents' treatment of Derek and me wasn't about our individual qualities or achievements. It was about their own psychological need to maintain their fantasy about who Derek was. "Marcus, as long as you keep bailing Derek out, your parents never have to face the reality that their golden child is actually irresponsible and unsuccessful. You're enabling their denial as much as Derek's behavior." That conversation changed everything for me. I realized that by continuing to give Derek money, I wasn't helping him. I was preventing him from facing the consequences of his choices and learning to be responsible. 6 months ago, Derek made what would turn out to be his final request for money from me, and it was a big one. Derek called me directly for the first time in years. He was crying and sounded genuinely panicked. "Marcus, I'm in serious trouble. I need help." "What's going on?" "I owe some people money, and they're threatening to hurt me if I don't pay them back. I need $15,000, and I need it this week." This was a new level of drama, even for Derek. "What people? What money?" I can't get into details over the phone, but these are dangerous people. If I don't pay them, something bad is going to happen to me. "Derek, if you're in physical danger, you need to call the police." "I can't call the police. That would make everything worse." "Marcus, I'm begging you. I've never been this scared in my life." For the first time, Derek actually sounded genuinely terrified. Despite all our history, he was still my brother, and the thought of him being hurt made me consider helping him. "Derek, I need to understand what's going on before I can help you. Who do you owe money to and why?" "It's complicated. I got involved in some business deals that went bad, and now I owe money to people who don't accept late payments." "What kind of business deals?" "Just importing and distribution stuff. But the deals fell through, and now I'm responsible for the losses." Something about Derek's story didn't add up. "Derek, if this is a legitimate business debt, there are legal ways to handle it. You don't need to be afraid for your safety over a normal business deal. These aren't normal business people, Marcus. Please, just trust me. I need the money, and I need it fast." I told Derek I would think about it and call him back. Then I called Sarah. "Sarah, Derek is asking me for $15,000 and claiming he owes money to dangerous people. Part of me thinks he's just escalating his manipulation tactics. But what if he's actually in danger?" "Marcus, think about this logically. Derek has been lying to you about money for years. He's never had a legitimate business or steady income. What kind of importing and distribution business could he possibly be involved in?" Sarah was right. Derek's story didn't make sense. He didn't have the capital, connections, or business experience to be involved in any legitimate importing business. I called Derek back and told him I wouldn't give him the money without more specific information about what he was involved in. Derek got angry. "Marcus, I'm your brother. I'm telling you I'm in danger, and you're treating me like a criminal. I'm treating you like someone who has lied to me about money for years and is now asking for $15,000 with a story that doesn't make sense. Fine, don't help me. But when something happens to me, remember that you could have prevented it." Derek hung up on me. That was the last conversation we had before everything fell apart. 3 weeks later, I got a call from my mother at 6 a.m. She was hysterical. "Marcus, Derek's been arrested. You need to get down here right now." "Arrested for what?" "I don't know. The police came to the house at 5 a.m. and took him away in handcuffs. They had a search warrant. I drove to my parents' house and found them both in complete shock. My father was pacing around the living room, and my mother was crying hysterically. "What did the police tell you?" I asked. They said Derek was being charged with drug trafficking and money laundering. My father said quietly. They searched his room and took boxes of evidence. Drug trafficking. Suddenly, Derek's request for $15,000 to pay dangerous people made perfect sense. Derek hadn't been involved in legitimate importing and distribution. He had been dealing drugs. "How long has this been going on?" I asked. "We had no idea," my mother sobbed. Derek said he was working in sales and investing in different business opportunities. But as the details came out over the next few hours, it became clear that my parents had been willfully blind to Derek's activities. Derek had been staying out all night several times a week for the past year, claiming he was networking or working on business deals. He had been receiving packages at the house that he said were samples for various business ventures. He had been making large cash deposits into his bank account that he claimed were profits from his investments. He had expensive clothes, electronics, and other possessions that he couldn't possibly afford on a sporadic legitimate income. All the signs were there, but my parents chose to believe Derek's explanations because they wanted to believe he was finally becoming successful. Derek was charged with trafficking cocaine, money laundering, and conspiracy. The police had been investigating him for months as part of a larger drug operation. According to the prosecutor, Derek had been working as a mid-level distributor, moving significant quantities of cocaine throughout the region. He wasn't just a small-time dealer. He was part of an organized network. The $15,000 Derek had asked me for wasn't to pay back dangerous people he owed money to. It was to buy his next shipment of drugs to sell. When he couldn't come up with the money, his suppliers cut him off, and he started getting desperate. That desperation led to him making mistakes that got him caught by police who had been building a case against the entire operation. Derek was facing 15 to 25 years in federal prison. When the reality of Derek's situation sunk in, my parents completely fell apart. My mother spent days crying and refusing to eat. She couldn't understand how her perfect son could be involved in something so serious. My father alternated between denial, "This has to be a mistake," and rage, "Derek has destroyed this family." But within a week, they had both settled on the same conclusion. This was somehow my fault. If you had just helped Derek when he asked for money, none of this would have happened. My mother said, "Mom, Derek asked me for money to buy drugs. If I had given it to him, I would have been funding his criminal activity. You don't know that. Derek said he was in trouble and needed help, and you refused to help your own brother. Derek was in trouble because he was dealing drugs. Giving him money wouldn't have solved that problem. It would have made it worse." But my parents were not interested in logic. They needed someone to blame for Derek's situation, and I was a convenient target. My father was even more direct. "Derek came to you for help, and you turned your back on him. Now he's facing decades in prison because his own brother wouldn't help him in his time of need. Dad, Derek's facing decades in prison because he chose to deal drugs, not because I wouldn't give him money. If you had been more supportive of Derek over the years, maybe he wouldn't have gotten involved in this kind of thing. Maybe he would have felt like he had family who believed in him." I was stunned. My parents were literally blaming me for Derek's decision to become a drug dealer. According to them, If I had just continued to enable Derek's irresponsible behavior and fund his lifestyle, he never would have turned to crime. The fact that Derek was a 35-year-old man who made his own choices didn't seem a factor into their analysis at all. Derek's bail was set at $500,000, which meant my parents needed to come up with $50,000 to get him out of jail while awaiting trial. My parents didn't have that kind of money. Their retirement savings was about $30,000, and their house had enough equity for maybe another $20,000, but that still left them short. That's when they came to me with a demand that would define our relationship forever. Marcus, we need you to help us bail Derek out of jail. How much are you asking for? $25,000. We can cover the rest. I looked at my parents. These people who had spent my entire life making it clear that Derek was the son they were proud of, and I was just the responsible one who was expected to clean up messes. No. What do you mean, no? My mother asked. I mean, I'm not giving you $25,000 to bail Derek out of jail. Marcus, he's your brother. He's sitting in jail right now. He's sitting in jail because he was dealing drugs, not because I won't pay his bail. How can you be so cold? This is family. Family doesn't deal drugs and then expect other family members to pay for their mistakes. My parents stare at me like I had just announced I was joining a cult. Marcus, my father said slowly, if you don't help us get Derek out of jail, he could sit there for months waiting for trial. Do you really want your brother in jail? I want Derek to face the consequences of his choices. If that means sitting in jail, then that's what needs to happen. We raise you better than this, my mother said. I can't believe you're abandoning your brother when he needs you most. I'm not abandoning Derek. I'm refusing to enable him. There's a difference. But my parents couldn't see the difference. In their minds, family loyalty meant bailing Derek out no matter what he'd done. The extended family pressure campaign. When my parents realized I wasn't going to change my mind, they launched a full-scale family pressure campaign. First came the grandparents. Derek's grandfather called me. Marcus, your parents are beside themselves about Derek's situation. Can't you help him get him out of jail? Grandpa, Derek was arrested for dealing drugs. This isn't a situation where family support is going to solve the problem. But he's family, Marcus. Family sticks together, no matter what. Family also doesn't deal drugs and put other family members in danger. Everyone makes mistakes, son. Derek needs his family now more than ever. Derek made the mistake of becoming a drug dealer. That's not the kind of mistake family should enable. But Grandpa didn't want to hear about accountability. He just wanted me to do the right thing and help Derek. Next came the aunts and uncles. Derek's aunt called. Marcus, I heard about Derek's troubles. Your parents are so worried about him sitting in jail. Derek is in jail because he was caught dealing drugs. Well, innocent until proven guilty, right? Maybe there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Aunt Linda, the police found drugs in his room and have recordings of him making deals. There's no misunderstanding. Even so, he shouldn't have to sit in jail while this gets sorted out. Can't you help your parents get him out? I'm not going to fund Derek's bail, so he can potentially continue dealing drugs while awaiting trial. One by one, every extended family member called to pressure me into bailing Derek out, and every single conversation followed the same pattern. Family loyalty is more important than Derek's crimes. I should help Derek regardless of what he's done. I'm being selfish and cruel for not helping. Derek's drug dealing is somehow excusable or understandable. Not one family member said, Derek made serious mistakes and needs to face the consequences. Not one person acknowledged that dealing drugs is dangerous and harmful to communities. Everyone was more concerned about Derek's comfort in jail than about the fact that he had been poisoning people with illegal drugs for months. The most insulting conversation came from Derek's cousin Mike, who called me a week after Derek's arrest. Marcus, I heard you refusing to help bail Derek out. That's correct. Man, I gotta say, I'm really disappointed in you. I always thought you were the smart, responsible one in the family. I am being responsible. Responsible people don't fund bail for drug dealers. Come on, Derek's not some hardcore criminal. He just got mixed up in some bad stuff. He's still your brother. Mike, Derek was trafficking cocaine. That serious criminal activity that destroys communities and ruins lives. Look, I'm not saying what Derek did was right, but you gotta put family first. Besides, you got the money. What's $25,000 to you? That question made me see red. What's $25,000 to me? It's money I earned through years of hard work and responsible decisions. It's not play money that I should throw away on people who make terrible choices. Derek's been struggling for years while you've been successful. The least you can do is help him when he really needs it. Derek has been struggling because he refuses to work steady jobs or live within his means. And now he's struggling because he decided to deal drugs. None of that is my responsibility to fix. Jesus, Marcus, when did you become so heartless? Derek made some mistakes, but he's still family. When did expecting adults to face consequences for their actions become heartless? Mike hung up on me, but not before telling me that the whole family was disgusted by my refusal to help Derek. 2 weeks after Derek's arrest, my parents called and asked me to meet with them and Derek's lawyer to discuss his case. I agreed to the meeting, thinking they wanted me to understand the legal situation better. Derek's lawyer explained that Derek was facing serious federal charges with mandatory minimum sentences. Even with a plea deal, Derek was looking at 10 to 15 years in prison. However, the lawyer continued, Derek's cooperation with federal investigators could potentially reduce his sentence significantly. What kind of cooperation? I asked. Derek has information about the larger drug trafficking organization he was working with. If he provides testimony that helps convict higher-level dealers, he could potentially get his sentence reduced to 3 to 5 years. That sounded reasonable to me. If Derek was going to face consequences anyway, at least he could help law enforcement stop other drug dealers. But then the lawyer got to the real point of the meeting. The challenge is that Derek's cooperation will require him to be out on bail during the investigation period. He can't provide ongoing assistance from jail. I saw where this was going. So you need someone to post Derek's bail so he can cooperate with the investigation and potentially get a reduced sentence? Exactly. Derek's parents have offered to put up their house as collateral, but they need an additional $25,000 in cash to complete the bail package. My parents looked at me expectantly. And you want me to provide the $25,000? Marcus. My mother said, this could be Derek's chance to get a much shorter sentence. If you help us get him out on bail, he could be home in just a few years instead of decades. I looked at Derek's lawyer. What are the conditions of his bail? Standard conditions. He can't leave the state. He has to check in with the bail bondsman regularly, and he can't associate with known criminals. What happens if Derek violates bail conditions or fails to appear for court? Then the bail money is forfeited, and additional warrants are issued for his arrest. I looked at my parents. So you want to give you $25,000 to bail out Derek, who has a long history of irresponsible behavior and making poor decisions. And if he screws up even once, that money is gone forever? Derek has learned his lesson. My father said, he knows how serious this is. Derek is 35 years old and was dealing drugs until 3 weeks ago. What exactly has he learned in jail that would make him suddenly responsible? He's had time to think about his mistakes, my mother said. He realizes he needs to turn his life around. I had heard that story so many times before. Derek was always learning his lesson and turning his life around right up until the next crisis. I'm not giving you money for Derek's bail. I said, Marcus, this could be the difference between Derek spending the rest of his life in prison or having a chance at a future, the lawyer said. Then Derek should have thought about that before he decided to deal drugs. My parents were furious with me for refusing to fund Derek's bail even after hearing that it could reduce a sentence. But I had finally learned that Derek's consequences were not my responsibility to fix. 3 weeks after I refused to help with bail, I received a letter from Derek in jail. It was the first direct communication I'd had from him since his arrest. The letter was 8 pages long and was the most manipulative thing I'd ever read. Derek started by saying he understood why I might be confused about his situation and wanted to set the record straight. According to Derek, he hadn't been dealing drugs at all. He had been working as an undercover informant for law enforcement, helping them build cases against real drug dealers. The drugs found in his possession were evidence he was gathering for police. The recorded conversations were him playing a role to gain the trust of actual criminals. Derek claimed his arrest was part of an elaborate plan to protect his cover, and that charges would be dropped once the larger investigation was complete. I couldn't tell you the truth before because it would have compromised the investigation and put me in danger, Derek wrote. But now that I've been arrested, I can explain what's really been going on. Derek went on to say that his work as an informant was dangerous and thankless, but that he was doing it to clean up the streets and protect our community. He said he was hurt and disappointed that I hadn't trusted him enough to help with bail, especially since he was risking his life to fight crime. The letter ended with Derek asking me to reconsider helping with bail, not for his sake, but for the sake of justice and community safety. I read the entire letter twice, and then I started laughing. Derek was literally trying to convince me that he was some kind of undercover hero who was only pretending to deal drugs to help law enforcement. It was such obvious bullshit that I couldn't believe he thought I would fall for it. But then I realized that Derek probably wasn't trying to convince me. He was trying to convince himself. Derek had spent his entire life creating elaborate stories to explain away his failures and mistakes. This was just the biggest story yet. I threw the letter away without responding. The trial and sentencing. Derek's case went to trial 6 months later. My parents begged me to attend to show family support, but I refused. Derek was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. According to news reports, Derek had been part of a cocaine trafficking operation that distributed drugs throughout 3 states. He had been working as a distributor for over a year and had made over $200,000 in drug profits. The $15,000 Derek had asked me for wasn't to pay debts to dangerous people. It was to buy a larger shipment of drugs that would have significantly expanded his operation. If I had given Derek that money, I would have been funding a major escalation in his drug-dealing activities. Derek's conviction made local news because of the scale of the operation and the amount of drugs involved. The headline read, "Local man sentenced to 18 years for cocaine trafficking." My parents were humiliated by the public nature of Derek's conviction, but they still couldn't accept that Derek was actually guilty of serious crimes. The prosecutors made Derek out to be some kind of criminal mastermind. My mother said, he was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Mom, Derek was caught with cocaine in his possession, and they have recorded conversations of him arranging drug sales. Those recordings could have been taken out of context. Even after Derek's conviction, my parents were still making excuses for him. In the months following Derek's sentencing, my relationship with my family completely deteriorated. My parents blamed me for Derek's lengthy sentence, claiming that if I had helped with bail, Derek could have cooperated with prosecutors and received a much shorter sentence. Derek is going to spend the best years of his life in prison because you were too selfish to help your own brother, my father said during our last conversation. Derek is going to spend 18 years in prison because he chose to deal drugs for over a year. His sentence has nothing to do with me. If you had been more supportive of Derek throughout his life, maybe he never would have gotten involved in drugs in the first place. Dad, I gave Derek thousands of dollars over years. I offered him job references, career advice, and emotional support. None of that prevented him from choosing to become a drug dealer. You never believed in Derek. You always looked down on him and treated him like he was less than you. I realized that my father was rewriting history to make Derek's criminal behavior somehow my fault. Dad, Derek made his own choices. He chose not to work steady jobs. He chose to live beyond his means. And he chose to deal drugs. None of those were my decisions. Derek felt like he could never measure up to you. Maybe if you had been more encouraging instead of always judging him, he wouldn't have felt like he needed to prove himself by making quick money. This was the most ridiculous part of my father's reasoning. Derek, the golden child who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes, supposedly felt inferior to me, the family scapegoat. Dad, you and Mom spent my entire childhood telling Derek he was perfect and telling me I needed to be more like him. If anyone felt inferior in this family, it was me. That's not how we remember it. And there it was. My parents had rewritten family history to make Derek the victim and me the villain. Derek's drug dealing wasn't the result of his own poor choices. It was a result of feeling inadequate compared to a successful brother. Derek's 18-year prison sentence wasn't the consequence of trafficking cocaine. It was the result of my failure to bail him out. My parents needed Derek to be the victim because they couldn't face the reality that their golden child was actually a criminal who had made terrible choices.